Joining me now here is Sultan Barakat, Professor of Public Policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University. And also we have Dan Perry, who's an Israeli affairs analyst and the former regional editor of the Associated Press in the Middle East, joining us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you both very much for your time. Sultan, I'll start with you. Obviously, we've seen this airstrikes that were carried out by Israel on Lebanon, specifically targeting Beirut yesterday. Do you think that's a proportionate response to the rockets that were fired from Lebanon this week?
It's totally disproportionate and has nothing to do with the rockets, in fact, because these two rockets that were fired, neither of them made it actually to Israel. One landed in Lebanon and the other was intercepted. And Hezbollah denied any association with those two rockets. Even Macron earlier today denounced the attack and he said it was unprovoked. And Israel should actually respect better the ceasefire.
There was a response from the US on this. They actually said that they support the Israeli response, adding that they urged the Lebanese government to ensure that there's a disarmament. This is also what Israel is saying. But we are seeing a weaker Hezbollah at the moment. It's very clear. And also a new Lebanese government that says it's trying to do what it can, given its limited resources. Is Israel's expectations realistic here?
Its expectations that the U.S. supports, as you say, and I suspect its expectations that the majority of the population of Lebanon supports. It is undoubtedly also difficult. I disagree with Dr. Barakat that Israel is seeking to prolong the war and wants to eternally target Beirut. I think we need not overcomplicate. Israel wishes the state of Lebanon to deploy the army as was promised along the south and prevent any and all attacks upon Israel. And Israel also wishes Hezbollah to be disarmed. Those two desires are not going to go away, and they have fairly widespread support around the world, no matter what people say about particular events on the ground in a particular village. This bigger picture is going to remain. And the big question, as you suggest, is whether the new government of President Aoun is able to actually do what they've promised.
But Dan, there seems to be an inequality here because Israel is still positioning its troops in 5 different locations in Lebanon. They're still there, and that is a breach of the ceasefire agreement.
Israel argues, of course, that Lebanon's in breach by not having fully deployed in South Lebanon its military and by doing nothing so far to actually initiate the disarming of Hezbollah. Yeah. But look, who's in breach, who's not in breach is, I think, rather secondary. For example, in Gaza, Israel's undoubtedly in breach. Israel walked away from the ceasefire knowingly because it has a strategy that was not fulfilled by the ceasefire, which is the eradication of Hamas as a governing force in Gaza. It's different in Lebanon. Israel has no actual conflict with Lebanon. In fact, I assess that the unspoken goal of all this pressure on the government of Lebanon is indeed not only to implement the ceasefire on Israel's terms, but to move towards a normalization deal, basically peace treaty between Israel and Lebanon.
And Dan, Sultan just wanted to respond to something you just said there.
Well, it's very important to realize that the agreement talks about 1701, the United Nations Resolution 1701, which called on Hezbollah to withdraw up to the Litani River. It does not talk about Hezbollah disarming or marginalizing Hezbollah as a political group, etc. These are issues that have developed afterwards. The real difficulty here is as long as Israel continues to not respect the ceasefire, preach Lebanon's security so regularly and so casually, it undermines the very legitimacy of the Lebanese government that needs to build in order to have full sovereignty on its ground.
Thank you very much, because we're running out of time. Sultan Barakat and Dan Perry, of course, so much to unpick here, but we will need to leave it here. OK, well, let's speak to Dan Perry, who's an Israeli affairs analyst and the former regional editor of the Associated Press in the Middle East. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dan, once again for your time. Is all of this an indication on whether the ceasefire is likely to hold or not?
Hard to say, but it certainly is an indication that Israel has reached the point of zero tolerance for any further rocket attacks coming at it from Lebanon and is compelled to take some drastic measures to force the Lebanese government to own the issue. I think we see clearly that the decades of Lebanon washing its hands of a situation where an Iran-backed and Iran-guided militia occupies its south and attacks Israel at will is basically over. And what to do about that is a big question for the region, for Lebanon, and for the world.
You say a big question for the region, for Lebanon and the world, and yet Israel does play a role in this because it still has its troops positioned in Lebanon, and that is a violation of the ceasefire agreement.
Look, Sarah, I think that's a non-issue. For years we heard Hezbollah using the Sheba farms, which is like a square kilometer, as an excuse for its aggression against Israel. Israel does not seek to occupy any part of Lebanon. I know they're in 5 locations that they use as reconnaissance, essentially, and their excuse for this is because the Lebanese military has not yet fully deployed in Lebanon South. And of course, the issue of disarming Hezbollah hasn't yet begun. These, I think, are tactical. The strategic issue is, for real, Israel does not have any irredentism towards Lebanon. I know this well. I live in Israel. No one here that I've met yet has enmity towards Lebanon. They want the outrage from their perspective of Lebanon allowing Hezbollah to attack Israel from its territory. They want that over. And I realize very well that the Lebanese armed forces are perhaps historically have not been powerful enough to actually control their own territory. And that has to do with their ability to impose their sovereignty on their own territory. And I think, if they wanted Israel's help, they'd get it. If they want Western help, they might get it. I suspect if they wanted Arab League help, they might get it. But I think the game is over when it comes to Israel tolerating Hezbollah. It's as simple as that.
You say the game is over for tolerating Hezbollah, and yet there are indications that Hezbollah has somewhat lost some of its power. Certainly, there's a new Lebanese government at the moment. It doesn't have as much power in the government. There is obviously a call for disarmament, but ceasefires are also based on trust. And shouldn't Israel give them more time to be able to implement this disarmament? Some have criticized Israel for its heavy-handed tactics, including the French President Emmanuel Macron yesterday, saying that this is a ceasefire breach.
I agree with you. Of course, on the other hand, the Americans have supported it, but that's the Trump administration. Look, it's a delicate balance because, of course, for Israel to compel Lebanon too brutally to take control of its own sovereign territory risks undermining the government of Aoun, who they would like to be a friend with. I agree with you that the current Israeli government in general has difficulty fostering trust for all the reasons that we know, and risks appearing too bellicose at times. All of that is true. But I think, for example, we need to distinguish between the situation in Gaza, which is horrifically complex, and a situation with Lebanon where Israel desires peace and wants Hezbollah gone. And I can hardly imagine an argument for not having Hezbollah gone. I can't think of too many examples in history where a rogue militia with aggressive intent towards neighbors was allowed to prosper in the country, and that country did well from this. So delicate, complex. I very much am worried about a resumption of hostilities. I am so afraid for my friends in Lebanon, and I hope a way is found to avoid a resumption of full-scale hostility. But I don't think, my assessment is, I don't think Israel is going to tolerate Hezbollah anymore.
Thank you very much for your thoughts there. Dan Perry in Tel Aviv.
Pleasure. Thank you, sir.